It is good to be in God's house together. Last week we talked about the idea of a small act of care and the significance that that brings. And today we're going to talk about something a little bit different, but we're going to continue in our course of what God requires of us, what Jesus has asked of us. Message to share the truth of Jesus to the world around us. And so today we're going to talk about the promising proposal of dignity. You know, I can easily have little to no tolerance for people in my life, and that's you know, whether it's rude people at the ticket counter, not to mention people who have done some pretty awful things, but maybe you felt that way before, where it's just like, my goodness, I've got little grace for a person like that. Anybody? Come on, here we go, all right? I'm thinking to myself, like, what made this person like this? How did this person end up like that? You know, what is their story? You know, isn't that how we are? We often judge things, and sometimes rightfully so, but we often, see, this is what we often though do too. We judge ourselves by our best moments and everybody else by their worst. You know? And here's the difference. There's a truth in the gospel that Jesus Christ applies dignity to every single person that he comes in contact. Every single person, no matter how they act or behave. And the good news of Christ proclaims that God sees you as a value to be redeemed, not an issue to be removed. You are of value to God, and his goal for your life is redemption. For every single person in this world, it's really his desire. But we so often, we look at people, and we can look at people and just like, that's an issue to be removed in our lives. We don't want anything to do with that. Aren't you thankful for God that he didn't remove us in that way? Instead, his heart towards us is to redeem us, to redeem our lives and our brokenness. Let's take a look at the promising proposal that dignity offers to people who are at their less than best. John chapter 8, if you have the Word of God with you in your hands or you got your sermon notes, you can look there with me. It says in verse 1, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came then again to the temple." That's important. We're going to talk about that later. "But all the people then came to him, and he sat down and he taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees then brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?' This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. And Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, 'Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her.' And once more he bent down, wrote on the ground, but when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, 'Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?' And she said, 'No one, Lord.' And Jesus said, 'Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more.' Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, 'I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of light.'" Jesus never ceases to amaze me. I am enthralled, enamored with who he is, how he decides to do things, how he responds, how he reacts to people. I am just floored by his transcendent wisdom. I am amazed by his moral compass, by his dedication to truth, and by his capacity to extend grace. Jesus amazes me. And when you really start to study the person of Jesus Christ, you can't cease to be amazed. If you ever get bored with Jesus, it's not Jesus that's boring, it's you. He is amazing. And in this moment, He certainly does not disappoint. And in fact, this moment really spells out the understanding of the gospel message of Jesus Christ very, very clearly. And it captivates me. The good news that God himself is the solution to mankind's sin and is indeed the answer to our salvation, because we need salvation. Is anybody in the house this morning? Do you need salvation? I need salvation in my life. Listen, if we as our mankind, if we had a money problem, God would have sent an accountant. If we had a sickness problem, he would have sent a doctor. If it was a political problem, he would have sent a politician. But those are not our problems at the root. The root of our problem is we have a sin problem. And so he sent a Savior, and his name is Jesus Christ. I cannot save myself from my sin. No matter how good I try to make my life, and man, I want to live to please God. I try to live out God's teachings and his commandments in my life. But no matter how good I get at doing that in my life, it still cannot save me. Because I have a sin issue. I live in a world of sin, and it has affected me greatly to the core. I want to give you 3 very real scenarios. These are like real-time scenarios that really I want you to feel something this morning. Now, I'm not all about trying to make people feel a certain way, but I want you to sit for a moment in feeling a feeling in these scenarios, because we're going to go somewhere with that, okay? 2014, ISIS, they had attacked the Yazidi people in northern Iraq. 500,000 people, genocide. That's 500,000 people. All of the men and the older boys they would execute if they did not convert to Islam. The women and girls they sold into the slave trade. To this day, 2,692 women have still not been found. 19 women were burned to death in this whole time. And ISIS just ravaged that people group. Let me ask this question: is the salvation of Jesus Christ powerful enough to save even those ISIS members if they were to repent and turn to Christ? Absolutely, it's not a trick question. But in our hearts, would we want Jesus to extend that to them? You don't have to answer that question. You don't have to answer that. Just this past week, maybe you've heard, but there was a 17-year-old high school junior that his name was Austin, and he was stabbed in the heart by a classmate because he got on the bus, and I don't know if there was signs. I don't know, but he said that's not your seat. And this other kid stabbed him in his heart, and he died. Austin died in his identical twin brother's arms as his dad was racing to the scene. Austin was the MVP of his football team, was planning to play college. Soon after, the father responded by saying, "I'm not trying to judge." What kind of parents did this child have? What was he taught? He brought a knife to a track meet and he murdered my son by stabbing him in the heart. The guy was in the wrong place and they asked him to move and he bowed up. This is murder, he said. But then he went on to say, listen to this: I have already forgiven him. Already. God takes care of things. God takes care of me. God's going to take care of my family. He told the news. Listen, I preach forgiveness. I believe in forgiveness. I believe in the power of forgiveness. But I'm going to be honest, I don't know what I would do as a dad in that scenario. I would like to stand up here and tell you that I would forgive like that dad did, but I'm not 100% sure that would be truthful. Just being honest. I don't know if I could get to that place. Just not sure I could. At least as quickly as he did. He made a choice to forgive this 17-year-old kid. Does Jesus' forgiveness extend to the young man who murdered his classmate? Absolutely. It's available for him too. Just this past week, friends of ours, the Trimbles, Joel and Yvonne, they minister in Haiti. And Yvonne shared a story about a man who was in the middle of the road begging police officers to take his life. The reason that he was doing that was because of the bandits and the gang violence and what had happened about 30 miles away from this scene was that those gang members, they killed his wife and his kids right in front of him. Now he felt like he had nothing to live for. Take my life. Instead, those police officers, they approached him. They stood him up. They gave him an endearing hug. And this man just broke down and wept. Wept and he wept. Can a hug save a life? Can God's grace somehow even be appropriate to give if one of those bandits turned to him? And we still have those questions that we ask. What about justice? Is God's forgiveness fair? And listen, I'm sorry, I don't mean to distress you with these stories or just get the lull here this morning as we're considering these things. My intention is not to do that to you, but to dive deep into the gospel to see just how far God's forgiveness goes. Because it goes deep and it goes far, it goes wide and long. Listen, there's a whole lot of people in this world that do not deserve God's forgiveness. But do you and me, do we deserve it? You know the answer to that. No, we don't deserve it. Just because we've maybe cleaned up our lives a little bit more than some, doesn't mean we deserve the forgiveness that Jesus offered us. And that forgiveness, that came with a price. It's costly. You know, it's cheaper for the one that receives forgiveness, but man, it is pricey for the giver, isn't it? And for Jesus, I mean, he gave his whole life for you and for me. That's a pretty high price to pay for some of the worst, is it not? Is it not? Oftentimes, as we walk through this thing in the life, we can let our own moral outlook dictate what should or shouldn't be. The issue of this world is our sin, your sin, my sin, all of our sin. It's not poverty, it's not war, it's not lack of purpose or meaning. Sin can tie into all those things, but really the problem that we have and that we've been faced with is sin. And we feel a certain way about people who've committed worse sins than ours. They don't deserve forgiveness, but neither do we. But do we want them to get the same kind of forgiveness that we got is really the question. We feel a certain type of way. How do we respond to those that are acting evil or immoral? How can we do that? The answer only is found in Jesus Christ. We can't do that in our own heart. Jesus somehow, some way distributed something that is so difficult for our human nature to give when it does not seem deserved. And that's dignity. Dignity is a hug to the soul that is marginalized and disregarded, but also to the soul that is disturbed and wicked. Dignity requires that we acknowledge the value of every person as God's image bearer. Do you know that's what the scriptures teach us, that God teaches us this? That there is intrinsic and inherent value on every single human being because we are made in the image of God. It's not by how morally cleaned up we get in life. It's not how successful we become. It's not how known we are, how befriended we are, that's where we get our value from in life. The place that you and I receive our value is from God. He made us in His image, and because of that very fact, He's attached His worth to our lives. And He saw that we were so worth it that He would give His only begotten Son to die on a cross for you and for me so that we would not perish but have eternal life. Come on, somebody. Praise Jesus for that. I know I brought us down, but let's get back up this morning, all right? Come on. Jesus did that for us. But so often, we hear stories like ISIS, and immediately we just want to take the stone, take the rock. We want to start throwing those things, don't we? We want to start taking them out, don't we? That's our human nature. We're like Vicini in The Princess Bride. You know, with Andre the Giant, you know, he's like, well, which way's my way? Pick up one of those rocks, get behind the boulder, and the minute the view of the man in black's head is in view, hit it with the rock, right? We are so quick to have an arsenal of rocks to hit people with in our lives. But in this story that we just read, there was only one person that was worthy enough, that had the authority to pick up a rock. And that was Jesus. But He chose not to do that, didn't He? Didn't He? Dignity. It requires that we acknowledge the value of every person as God's image bearer. As we walk through this story right now, I want to start by just looking through Jesus' eyes. Because if we want to start living with dignity and giving dignity in this type of way, the gospel way, then we have to see how Jesus sees people. Why did He come in the first place? Well, first and foremost, Jesus sees humanity, us, as those without all the answers. I mean, do you notice that? Like, the first thing He's doing, He's teaching people in the temple. Everywhere that Jesus went, He was teaching. He was teaching crowds of thousands or a one-on-one meeting in a room. He was constantly teaching. Why was Jesus teaching? Well, the reason that Jesus was teaching all the time was because humanity was confused, still is, about God, about life, about this world, about why we're here, all of it. We're confused in that way. And so Jesus, He sees His people as those without the answers. And He came to show us who God is and who He truly is. Because there's a lot of confusion about God. Jesus would teach and teach and teach so that He could give clarity in the midst of the confusion. And if we're going to effectively share about Jesus, we have to understand the cultural context of which we live in. We have to start thinking mission, not just meeting. It's great to gather and to learn and grow and to worship and all of that kind of stuff, but it's so much more than the meeting. Christ has called us to be on mission. You see, in the meetings, most of us here were like-minded. When it comes to Jesus, we're believers, but that's not the case in the world. So if we're going to be incarnational like Jesus teaches us to, then we have to minister to the realities that shape the community around us. Meaning, what worked to reach the world in the 1970s isn't going to work today. Meaning, what some other church is doing over across town might not work for our church. Meaning, we've got to be on mission with Jesus Christ in people's lives, not just meeting together, Leslie Newbegin was a missionary theologian from Scotland, and he ministered for almost 30 years in South India. And it's kind of a neat thing to read some of his books and writings, because you'll find that he shifted in his theology. He came from Cambridge, and from that place there was more of a liberal bent on his theology. But as he started to really pour into the theology of the cross and really get into the life of Jesus and start to really find what it is to be a missiologist and all of this, it turned to more of an evangelical faith. And he shares kind of an idea. He says, if you were to go to India right now and you were going to plant a church there, and so you get a space and you find a billboard, and up on the billboard in their language, you put up there, the only way to be born again is through Jesus. You kind of feel good about yourself, and you said, okay, I just put the gospel up there, people are going to read that, and, we'll have some discussions. But here's the thing. Nobody in India is going to take too much notice of that. If anything, they're not going to care too much. Why? Because in India, the idea of being born again happens all the time. It's called reincarnation. That's just another way to be born again, right? And so, again, sometimes as the church, we can think we're preaching the gospel, but we're not actually talking the language to the people around us. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to come up here and start talking in different ways just to be cool or relevant, because I already am cool and relevant. No, I'm just kidding. I'm far from it. Far from it. All right? But we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful that we think, I just shared the gospel. Well, but did you do it in a way that's even relating to that person's life? Do you do it in a way that they actually see that they need Jesus? You see, sometimes as Christians too, we try to force the gospel on people because we know that's best for them, right? So we push it on them. But what are we doing when we do that? Really, we're taking their dignity away, because we're saying, I'm not going to give you a free choice. This is what you need to have. You should take it. Jesus didn't really do that. No, Jesus taught people. He taught his ways. He said, this is why it works. And what did he do? He let them sit on it and think about it and receive more of him and start to apply the things in their lives. And they're like, wow, this Jesus guy really knows what he's talking about here. We've got to be careful that we're not just pushing. Jesus, he gave. He didn't push. He said, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. He was saying, listen, you don't have all the answers. I understand that. You might think that you have all the answers. You can think that I'm going to help you understand that you don't. But listen, if you listen to my wisdom, you're going to be like a wise person, that when storms come in your life, you're not being tossed to and fro everywhere in life. You're going to be able to survive. You're going to be able to get through those things. Dignity says you're worth it. Jesus says, come up, build your house on this rock because you're worth it. So, first, Jesus saw his followers and the crowd who gathered to hear him, but next he saw the scribes and Pharisees come in here. And this is another thing that I think Jesus sees in our humanity. Jesus sees us as those who think we're all good. Because the scribes and the Pharisees, they thought that they were all good. They didn't think they needed Jesus. If anything, they were trying to get rid of Jesus. And time again, it was them against, really, they had this form of godliness, but man, they really denied God's power. They rejected everything about God, really, because Jesus was God and he was standing right in front of them. And that's why Jesus would often quote from Isaiah, because they would depend on their own morality. And Jesus would say, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. They just miss God in the midst of all of their religious doings. They missed him. The reason the Pharisees couldn't see Jesus as Messiah was because they didn't think that they needed him. They had the law. They didn't need this version of the Messiah. They needed a version that was going to conquer Rome and bring them out on top. That's not the gospel. That's not the gospel that Jesus came to preach nor give. They were fine without him. You know, whether it's religion and we kind of get fine, we kind of get fine without God because just over the years we start to just rely more on our own morality and we kind of judge other people and kind of live in the superior sense, or there's plenty of people that are out there that are doing pretty good for themselves and they would scratch their head and said, I don't really need God. I'm fine without God. I don't need God in my life. That's just a crutch for you. That's a whatever. But I don't really need God. I remember one such guy, because I have these conversations all the time. I can remember a great guy that had the chance to know towards the end of his life. He was rough around the edges. He'd give you a piece of his mind. He was in the military for over 25 years. He saw a lot of things, experienced a lot of things. And out of that piece of his life, he kind of came to realize, or at least he told himself, like, I don't need anybody. I've got this. And I certainly don't need God. However, when sickness hit his life, and he realized he wasn't going to be able to beat this one, excuse me, he realized, no, maybe I do need God. Maybe I do need something more here because I can't get there myself. Now, I'm so thankful that he received Christ towards the end of his life. He acknowledged that. He acknowledged his need for God. So I know where he is to this day. But man, there's a lot of people out there that think, I don't really need God. That's really what Jesus sees here in our humanity too, through the lens of watching the Pharisees and the scribes. Lastly, Jesus sees us, our humanity, as those who need to be rescued. Our humanity needed to be rescued. Listen, our own truth cannot save us. Our own good life or righteousness cannot save us. Our own good works, they're good, but they can't save us. There's nothing else that can save us. Only Jesus can. Jesus equals salvation. Nothing else. It's Jesus. Him and him alone. If you got Jesus, you got salvation. If you don't got Jesus, you don't got salvation. I'm sorry, that's what he says. He says, I am the only way, the truth, and the life. And except through me, you cannot get to the Father except through me. He's not being arrogant. He's not trying to just diminish what everybody else thinks. He is simply saying, listen, this is the way, and I'm offering it to you. Here you go. Here you go. Jesus sees us as those that need to be rescued. And in this story, and we see this woman who's thrown before Jesus, condemned, about to be stoned. We have to realize something. That this story, amongst many of the other gospel stories that we read, it's not just about this woman. It's not just about these Pharisees. It's about you and it's about me. Do you see yourself in this story, is what I'm asking. Do you see a little bit of this woman in you? Do you see a little bit of these Pharisees and scribes in you? Or do you see a little bit of the crowds, the followers of Jesus that just wanted his teaching, but where did they go in this story? It's just, by the end of it, it's just Jesus and this woman that was standing there before him. Where does people go? What do you see? Do you see some of that in your own life? Jesus, he knew our real condition needed saving. That's why in Matthew 9:36 it says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. They were dead in their trespasses. They were lost. They were broken. They were harassed and helpless. Those words actually mean troubled and thrown aside. Anybody ever feel troubled and thrown aside in this life? Just less than, just ignored. There's no point in your life, just made to feel like you are the bottom. That's our humanity, you know. And even with Jesus, I'm going to be honest, even with Jesus, sometimes I feel like that too. I feel troubled and tossed aside, helpless sometimes. Now, my faith always gets me back to Jesus. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's how I always feel, though. Come on. We live in a world that is problem-ridden, stressed, useless. Why do you think that the suicide rates have gone up 37% in the last 25 years? It's now one of the leading causes of death. Many of us have been affected by it. Stats will say that 85% of us have personally been affected by it. Why? Oh, there's lots of problems. But I think it's because of what we just read. Our humanity feels harassed and helpless. Harassed and helpless. The stakes couldn't be greater. There are so many that are hurting and that are helpless, that need a hug of Jesus Christ. And he's called you and me to be that hug, to be that person that will step into somebody else's life and show them the dignity that God places on their life. Stakes couldn't be greater. We're called to rescue their lives today from their own sin, helplessness, past, their guilt, their shame, condemnation, the sins committed against them, all feels like rocks. Rocks that are aimed for them. Where do you go? Where was this woman going to go in this story? She'd get up, she'd get pelted with a rock. And that's how humanity can feel so often. Here's the thing, all of us are guilty. We've all fallen short of the glory of God, so there's some truth to our guilt. But our human tendency is this: truth is easier avoided than it is accepted. I'd much rather avoid or squeak around some of the details if I can make something look a little bit different so that I come out looking like I'm good. Anybody? Truth is easier avoided than it is accepted. And that's really the story of what we're in here right now. We don't like being exposed by the truth many times. We don't want to bring ourselves in the light because we feel vulnerable, very vulnerable. Do you think this lady felt vulnerable? I can't imagine. She had all of her sin out for the world to see. Quite vulnerable. There's some truth in it. She was a sinner. She sinned. And there was a law against that particular sin. Wow. We either run or we justify when we're presented with truth. But the story goes on to express so much more about our human nature. We can be like the scribes who relentlessly judge, or we can be like the woman who is trapped in her own sin and condemnation. But as I highlight some insights from the story, I believe that Jesus would like for us to inspect how we see people. So important. So important. And I just want to bring us back to this moment here. Just think about this for just a moment. Jesus, early in the morning, just leaving the Mount of Olives, and he comes to the temple. And he sets up shop in what we would know as the court of the Gentiles. That's where this story would have taken place. because of what was going on there. It says he came to the temple and he starts teaching, and his followers are there, and they're just like hanging on every word that he says. They're amazed. It's just like Jesus' teaching just gets better and better, and all of a sudden their church service gets disrupted, and there's this commotion, and the Pharisees and the scribes come in, and it looks like they're dragging somebody with them. Like, what is going on exactly? And all of a sudden they throw this woman at the feet of Jesus, and they start asking him questions. They start by saying, "We caught this woman in the very act of adultery." Now that just leads me to a lot of other questions, like, what the heck are you guys doing, right? Like, what's going on here? But Jesus is presented with this, and they're like, we're such good followers of this thing called the law of Moses. We want to enforce it now. Jesus, you know that the law commanded us to stone such a woman as this. What do you say? They were trying to trap him, and Jesus probably just thinking to himself, oh my gosh, can I just get some like white sandy beaches here for a moment? Like, I am so tired of these people. I mean, get a life. This is ridiculous. Like, every chance that you get, you're trying to, trap me with something, and oh my goodness, right? And so Jesus does what we all should do. And I'm learning to do this a little bit more in my life. He took a holy pause. Sometimes you just need to I'm just going to pause here. Listen, if you need to do what Jesus does, people might think you're crazy, but you just kneel down and start drawing on the floor. They'll either think you're crazy and run away from you, or they'll just be like, what the heck are you doing, right? Sometimes you just need to take a holy pause, and Jesus did that in this moment. And we find him doing this peculiar thing of writing in the dirt. Maybe he was writing an escape plan, or he was just in the mood to draw some pictures. I don't know, but he paused. And too many people refuse to pause in their lives when it comes to how they see others, because that rock is right there and ready to go. I mean, it's right there. It's in your bag. It's in your arsenal. You see people, and immediately it's right there in your hand, ready to go, ready to fly. The truth is, though, how I see people can show me how I see myself. See, a lot of times, the things that I can't stand about others, if I'm honest with myself, those are things that I can't stand about me. And so when I really see other people and their stuff and their junk, all their ridiculous attitudes and all that kind of stuff, I want to take it out, but do I have any of that in my life? Man, I know as a parent, parents, right? You see something in your child that they're doing, and you just and then you realize, oh, I probably taught them that by my behavior, right? Parents, anybody, right? Yeah. We can see ourselves so often. And in this moment, Jesus, as he's writing on the ground, I'll bet you that he's recalling verses like Leviticus 20, verse 10, or Deuteronomy 17:7. It's the law of Moses. It very clearly says that an adulterer and adulteress should be put to death. They should surely be put to death. And it goes on and says the hands of the witnesses should be the first to put them to death. These are the very exact laws for the Jewish people to live by. And Jesus knew every single one of those laws, but he kept writing in the ground. So they pressed him again. This time Jesus stood up and said one of the most profound things ever. He said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." He was giving them permission. Hey, you got to do what you got to do. Pick up a stone. If you're without sin, throw the first one. What does he do after that? Kneels down once again, starts drawing, starts writing in the ground. It's not what they were expecting in that moment. Jesus has this way of just disrupting the ridiculousness of people's issues. Jesus' response shows something more. It shows me that how I see people can gauge the level of my Christ-like maturity. Because here's the thing. If I got the stone ready to go and this is how I respond all the time, am I responding like Jesus responded? Am I responding in a mature Christ-like manner? Or am I a little bit more immature in how I see people? Because if I want to be like Jesus, then I've got to start to see people as Jesus sees people, right? Jesus could have told them off. He could have fired back at them. He could have been indifferent and told the woman, you're getting what you deserved here in this moment. But he didn't do any of that. He decided to be above the pettiness and the trickery of the Pharisees. And every time we engage with somebody that does not get Jesus, that does not want Jesus, that does not know Jesus, that does not love Jesus, how we see them really can reveal the maturity of Christ in our own lives. If we want to write people off, if we sit there and judge, if we could care less, if we get angry, want to tell somebody off, then it shows how spiritually immature we really are, actually. And I think to myself, oh God, I need you even more. Jesus neither condoned nor condemned with his response here. He simply put the full weight of judgment on his accusers. In other words, go through with your plan, but if you have sin yourself, how is that ultimately going to affect you? Jesus was getting them to think. Here's the thing, as I said before, they condemned themselves initially. This is the amazing thing about this story. These people are condemning this woman, and they come to Jesus and they say, we found her in the very act of adultery. The law says stone her. With those words, they actually condemn themselves. And let me tell you why. Because the full law says the adulterer and the adulteress. If they found her in the act, well, where was the man then? And if they weren't willing to uphold the whole law, that means they were breaking the law as well. Jesus, even in his grace for the Pharisees, he didn't say, you morons. Don't you realize what you're doing here and that you're breaching the law too? No, he didn't act like that. He didn't act like them. He didn't act like them. Jesus, he kneels down one more time, begins writing again in the dirt, and once again, my mind goes to this place of how he sees people. And often I'll judge another person, but yet miss a mark myself. It's called hypocrisy. How I see people can actually test my real trust in God. Because if my judgment call is what's most important to me, I'm trusting my judgment rather than I'm trusting God's. Jesus was all about this in his teachings. The Good Samaritan, people that the Jewish people hated and the Samaritans hated them. He gives a story that the Jewish religious people, they just walk by their fellow countryman who's beaten up and on the road, left for dead. They didn't help them out. Now, there's laws that they were supposed to help them out. That's why, again, so profound in this story that they were missing the mark of God. But yet this Samaritan comes along, somebody that they loathed, and he stops and he helps. Because Jesus is interested in getting to your and my heart about this thing called humanity. Not to mention the story of the prodigal son. Remember the prodigal son? This kid, he just takes half of dad's possessions, goes, just lives in the world, just spends everything on prostitutes and partying, just lives it up, and he finds himself in a pig pen, but he runs home to dad, and dad is like amazing, and he receives him back in, But what about the older brother? I mean, if I was that older brother, I would have a lot of rocks for my younger brother. You know what I'm saying? I mean, sometimes family dynamics, right? I would, you better stay away from me. I will pelt you with this rock. And because I'm the older brother, I get to do that, right? Man, I'll tell you, we've got these rocks. And the older brother, sure. It's like, Dad, like, what? The what? Like, what? You're accepting him back? You already gave him half of the stuff. Like, you haven't even given me something that I could celebrate with my friends. Like, you're doing this for him? And he was torqued. I mean, he was so mad because he didn't realize that his joy wasn't found in the possessions that he would get. His joy could only be found in the Father that he had. And we miss it so often, and we get jacked up in terms of these different things in our own humanity, and we stop trusting God, and we start trusting our own judgments. Do I trust that God is a good judge, a good God, or do I take things into my own hands? The only person who had the authority and righteousness to condemn this woman did not. Rather, he sat down in the dirt and wrote once again. Why? Why do we find that Jesus was writing the dirt these couple times? Well, every detail in Scripture is there for a reason. And what was he writing? Most likely, I'm about 99% sure, he was writing the scribes and the Pharisees, all their names, in the ground. And you might ask why. Well, because he was fulfilling what Jeremiah 17:13 said. He says, "O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth," or the dust, as some translations say. "For they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water." This is so key, because right before this morning happened, it was a day called yesterday. And yesterday in this story was the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. After this day ended, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. He spent the night here. But that day, the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, is pretty important. Because on that last day, there was this water libation ceremony that the Jewish religious people would celebrate, and it would kind of end the feast, and it would be this great ceremony, this great celebration. But it says in John chapter 7:37 that Jesus, during this time, he stood up and he cried out to the crowds, and he said, "If anyone is thirsty, come to me. And from you, if you receive me, from you will be waters of, or I should say, fountains of living water." What did Jeremiah 17:13 say? Right after Jesus said this, it says there's a division that took place, and there was some that accepted Jesus and some that rejected Jesus. "All who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you, those who reject you, will be written in the dust. For they've forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water." Jesus, when he stood up, he said, "Here am I am your Messiah. Accept me or reject me." The Pharisees rejected him. That's why they were testing Jesus in this moment. And so Jesus was writing their names in the dust. And what do we find happens? It says one by one those Pharisees walked away, starting with the older. Why? It's because they were the ones that were more learned in the Scriptures. This Scripture no doubt would have came to mind. And if just by chance there was any possibility that Jesus was who he said he was, they didn't want to be those people who were written in the dust. And so they walked away. They walked away. And here in closing today, we're called to respond as Jesus responds. And what do we see in this story? We find that he responds with compassion over comparison. You know, as Christ followers, sometimes we can do this and look at the world like, oh, you're all terrible and evil and bad and wrong. Well, so were we. Without Jesus, there's no difference. There's absolutely no difference. So we're not trying to compare ourselves to other people. We're here to live out compassion, just like Jesus lived out compassion. Compassion breaks down the hardness of hearts so that God's love can get in there. Not only that, we're to respond with grace that is bent on redemption. Jesus said, go and sin no more. He said, I don't condemn you. That's the grace. And it's by grace that you've been saved through faith, not by good works that anyone can boast. It's not that she had to clean herself up first, then Jesus would accept her. No, she was before Jesus, and he did not condemn her. Wow. He forgave her. That's what's ridiculous about grace. Again, as I said before, to the recipient it's free, but to the giver it's costly. And all through Scripture we find that forgiveness is always accompanied by sacrifice. Jesus in this moment was foretelling what he was going to do. And I'm going to tell you how in just a minute. Grace is not sloppy, and it's certainly not, listen to me now, it is not a license to sin. And I get actually very ticked off when I hear people using a verse like that to say, well, see, Jesus doesn't condemn you, but he also says, go and sin no more, so stop sinning. Grace is awesome, and I love grace, and I'm so thankful for grace. But grace doesn't just save you, it sanctifies you. And it starts to clean your life up to be more like Jesus. Grace is always complemented by truth. Jesus, it says that he came in the fullness of grace, in the fullness of truth. He was 100% both, and they never contradicted each other. Jesus also teaches us to respond with truth that is free of tolerance. Jesus said, go and sin no more. He didn't say, if you can. Just try. You'll be okay. You're fine. It's okay. Even if you sin a little bit, I still love you. I said, go and sin no more. The world preaches tolerance, but truth does not have a place for tolerance, because tolerance bends the truth to fit its standard rather than truth's standard. That's why Jesus later said in John chapter 8 that if you abide in my word, you're truly disciples of mine, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. There's no freedom if you're not willing to accept the truth about your condition and even about humanity's condition. It's truth that sets us free, not tolerance. Tolerance is the world's form of truth. It's a poisonous substitute that'll lead you to bondage and not freedom. Tolerance wants you to accept without disagreement, but truth calls us to repent without compromise. Jesus shows us that truth does not have to diminish grace, and grace does not have to dilute truth. And the only place that can take place, and that could take place, was the cross of Jesus Christ, where truth and grace were on display. Grace for the entire world. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But at the same time, truth, it is finished. I have done this work. They need to come to me and through me for this thing called eternal life. Because that's what Jesus came to do. Jesus, the gospel story is this, that God left all of heaven to come to this earth, to walk with us, to talk with us, to teach us, to help clarify the confusion that we have about God and about one another and life. And he said, I'm going to live with you. I'm going to be a part of you. I'm going to be one of you. I'm putting on flesh and blood. But I'm not just going to come and save you riding in on a white horse. No, instead, I'm going to save you from yourself. And I'm going to save you from sin. And I'm going to save you from condemnation. I'm even going to save you from death. That's the amazing thing about Jesus. It doesn't coming to Christ doesn't mean you avoid death. It just means you die safely. You get to go be with Jesus. That's the safest place you can be. Right? And so Jesus in this gospel, he gives himself on a cross because forgiveness requires a sacrifice. And he bled for you and me. He was tortured for you and me. He took upon all of your sin and all of the sin that's been done to you. It's an age-old doctrine called expiation, where not only did he pay for your sin, but all of the sins that's been done to you as well. Thank God that he covered all of it. He sees you in that place. Even those things that have been done to you, Jesus died to redeem you from the weight and the lies and the labels that came from it. So good. But you know, Jesus not only died on the cross, it's not where the story ends. He was placed in a what? Let's be a little louder. A what? And what was rolled over the entranceway? One of these. A little bit bigger. A lot bigger. But when Jesus saved this woman from all of those rocks being thrown at her, it was a picture of what he would be covered by in his death. Rocks. But even the rocks that covered his dead body couldn't hold him down. Because he defeated death. He defeated sin. He defeated the condemnation that comes with it. And he rose up out of that grave so that you and I could have life, real life, spiritual life, life that's connected again with God, life that is eternal and not just based on the finite human nature of materialism and everything that comes with it. He gave us real life. The stones could not hold him down. And so today, I'm just going to ask, as we in our hearts today reflect on this story and what Jesus said, I don't know where you're at. I would think that you've probably look a little bit like the woman, look a little bit like the scribes, the Pharisees, even the followers of Jesus that just wanted good teaching. You see yourself in this story. Here's what I'm asking you to do. Whether they're the rocks that have been thrown at you or the rocks that you keep in your own arsenal, I'm just going to ask that you take all of those rocks, you just simply make a memorial out of them today. An altar before God in your heart. Say, God, I'm laying myself down again. I'm laying myself down on your altar and saying, God, rend my heart so that I see people like you see people. So that I see the brokenness of people's life, but I also see the dignity that you've placed in their life. That I could be somebody like you that picked that lady up from the ground in her brokenness. And I can restore hope. I can give her redemption only through your gospel, only through you, Jesus Christ. I want to be used that way. I want to be used to give people real life, real hope, the peace of God. Will you lay yourself down on the altar to be used by God in that way today? Don't just make a commitment if you're unwilling to do it. But I'm going to ask simply as we just take these last few moments together, make an altar before the Lord, and pour out your worship to him.